Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the first breakout session today. We are so happy that you're joining us for this presentation, The Literacy Imperative, Making a Path Forward to Effective and Equitable Reading Instruction for All Students. My name is Denise Walston, and I'm the Director of Mathematics for the Council of the Great City Schools. The Council of the Great City Schools is a coalition of 77 of the largest urban districts, and it's dedicated to the improvement of education for children in the inner cities. And our organization is one of the sponsors of this summit. Additionally, the council was an early advocate for the Trial Urban District Assessment, otherwise known as TUDA, that allows for oversampling in some of the largest urban school districts, of course on a voluntary basis, to permit education leaders and the public to get comparable city-by-city achievement data for NAEP, mathematics, and reading. My work in mathematics parallels my colleagues' work in reading. Before I introduce our speaker today, please know that at the end of this presentation, I will be moderating a live Q&A session. You will be able to pose your questions by posting them in the chat space for me to ask our speaker. So let's get started. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Robin Hall. Dr. Hall is the Director of Mathematics, Language Arts, and Literacy for the Council of the Great City Schools, where she keeps members informed about research on systems and successful strategies for improving student achievement. She also provides support for development of resources and tools to support implementation of college and career standards. In 2011, Dr. Hall came to the council after extensive work for more than 25 years in Atlanta public schools, including as executive director of K-8 schools. She was a building principal, the K-12 language arts and literacy district coordinator, a high school language arts department chair, and as a high school language arts teacher. In 2006, Dr. Hall was nominated to the National Assessment Governing Board by Secretary of Education Margaret Spellings. Among the board's responsibilities was selecting the content of the NAEP test, selecting the subjects to be tested, and most recently, Robin has served on the NAEP visioning panel for reading to update the NAEP reading framework. And yes, Dr. Hall and I are colleagues and collaborators. Thus, you heard me with the Freudian slip of giving her the title of Director of Mathematics. Robin's commitment to empowering all students by focusing on moving students from learning to read to reading to learn and liberation could be seen years ago as when she was an advanced placement teacher and she had other classes that were not. Recognizing the inequities that existed in terms of expectations and structures that privilege some students while handicapping others, Robin made the bold decision to give all of her students the same rich text that her AP students were reading, but she also provided just-in-time supports for her students. This showed Robin's commitment to empowerment and equity. You'll find that Robin's words and actions are always congruent. It is my pleasure to welcome our speaker, who will discuss the literacy imperative with us today, Dr. Robin Hall.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the Institute of Education Sciences for inviting me to speak at this reading summit to take a deeper dive in linking reading, assessment data, and learning outcomes. To be sure, the data shared during Peggy Carr's keynote address was really a call to action. We must lean into the literacy imperative, if you will, to disrupt the systemic processes, procedures, and practices that perpetuate even lower reading levels for our most vulnerable and marginalized students. When we look at the decline of NAEP reading scores over the most recent assessment years at all three grades, there is reason for grave concern. In his book, Good to Great, Jim Collins urges us to exercise the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of our current reality, whatever they might be. So, what are the brutal facts of our reality in this moment? According to the 2018 NAEP or fluency study recently released by NCES, an estimated 1.27 million fourth grade public school students are performing below basic on the NAEP reading assessment, of which an estimated 0.42 million fourth grade students in the below NAEP basic low subgroup are more likely to have underdeveloped fluency, word recognition, and phonological decoding skills. Growing numbers of Black and Hispanic students performing below basic on the 4th and 8th grade NAEP reading assessments, and the overrepresentation of Black students in the lowest below basic NAEP basic subgroup in 4th grade is quite alarming. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused an unprecedented disruption in the educational process and continues to have a greater adverse impact on students with disabilities, English language learners, students of poverty, and students who may not have easy access to computers to engage in virtual learning. Civil and social unrest and economic hardships have also taken a significant social and emotional toll on students, families, and staff. The instructional challenges posed by school closures limited the number and the quality of early literacy and overall reading instruction, resulting in more students reading below grade level. To be sure, this list of facts is abbreviated, but still very overwhelming. However, we cannot let this analysis lead to paralysis. We must take action on behalf of our students. They are counting on us. Without a strategic, systemic, and sustainable response to this reading regression, we will deny our students civil rights to become proficient readers and enjoy all of the benefits that being a good reader brings. This involves not doing what we've always done and expecting to get different results. So how do we make steady, consistent progress in overcoming the complications of and the educational inequities exposed by the pandemic? How do we provide equitable and culturally relevant reading instruction that will accelerate student attainment of grade level reading skills given our current reality in this moment? It is imperative that we, as national stakeholders, policymakers, and educators, ensure that all students have access to rigorous grade level reading instruction that addresses learning gaps, and social emotional needs within the context of grade level work. Equitable access to high quality reading instruction and educational opportunity, regardless of the student population, including English language learners, students with disabilities, students with learning and attention issues, and Black and Brown students of poverty. Access to prioritized grade level reading instruction and content that not only promotes in depth, rigorous instruction, but provides additional time for teachers to provide students with the support and scaffolds they will need to access grade level text. Access to rich and culturally relevant texts, as well as high quality student facing instructional and digital resources. So, in thinking about this, we all know that unfinished learning is a natural part of the teaching and learning process. It is the ebb and flow of a student's learning progression as they matriculate through school. However, all too often, unfinished learning leads to remediation or pull-out interventions that serve to further isolate students and impede their access to rigorous, engaging grade level content. This is how something as natural as unfinished learning leads to intractable achievement and opportunity gaps. Addressing unfinished learning in a constructive manner is therefore essential not only to our national, state, or district's short-term response to the current pandemic, but long-term commitment to educational excellence and equity. This cartoon illustrates how the cycle of reading regression keeps revolving. Its message prompts us to interrogate our beliefs about the children we teach every day and about ourselves as educators. Do we believe that all students can learn to read on grade level with the appropriate supports and scaffolding, regardless of their current reading level? Do we actually have the skill and will to do what is necessary to help all students become literate and actually experience the joy of reading? I can recall as a secondary language arts teacher assigned to a school in a community of high poverty in the 1980s, remembering how language arts classes were organized and students were assigned to these classes based on their reading percentiles on the state assessment. Each grade level had 3 courses that organized content and text that students read around what students could not achieve or did not achieve, rather than what they could achieve with good instruction. Sound familiar? I saw how these instructional groupings created a ceiling for students that not only negatively affected their self-concepts, but also thwarted their learning trajectory in profound ways. Even as a novice teacher, I realized the inequity of this construct. Students knew their designations and these course distinctions in their minds translated into their status in life. I decided to use the same textbook for the higher level course in all my classes and held the same grade level expectations for all of my students. Of course, I had a lot of work to do in convincing all of my students that they were able to achieve at high levels while providing the scaffolds necessary for them to achieve grade level expectations. I also told them that I would believe for them until they believed for themselves, which the majority of them eventually did. I just say this to emphasize the importance of rooting out the mindsets, beliefs, and biases that perpetuate the inequities in our schools, even to this day. Beliefs that are frankly harming rather than helping our students. And as we have seen earlier, there is NAEP trend data to prove it. So I submit that when we are disciplined and courageous enough to integrate our beliefs about the children in front of us and confront our biases and acknowledge our part in fueling this literacy dilemma, as Jim Collins encourages us to do, then the serious work of changing the trajectory of reading achievement among our most vulnerable students begins. The Council of the Great City Schools developed a resource entitled Addressing Unfinished Learning Amid COVID-19 School Closures. This resource proposes strategic, systemic, and sustainable action steps that will encourage equitable student access to high-quality instruction and educational opportunity. In this resource, we recommend that teachers ensure that all students have the opportunity to engage in productive struggle with Tier 1 reading instruction, rather than assigning students reading below grade level to less demanding or simplified texts, or assume that students who are having difficulty require remedial practice on basic reading skills. This is particularly important for English language learners who struggle with reading may be a reflection of the process of second language development, rather than a lack of literacy skills. We also recommend that teachers take the time to use read-alouds of rich grade level texts to model fluent reading and metacognitive strategies for making meaning of text while building on student assets rather than focusing on their deficits. Instead, teachers should take the time to discuss the text, provide scaffolded support on how to discern the meaning of words in context, and allow students to express their thinking and ideas with peers. This will ensure that students continue to work with rigorous, engaging grade level text and content. Also important to note is the vital role motivation and purpose play in the level of student interest in reading text. Activating interest in topics of culturally relevant text by discussing its relevance to concerns, their lives, or current events can help students build their capacity to engage with text in meaningful ways and recapture their love of reading. Moreover, when assessing reading comprehension, it is important to use assessment results to identify whether gaps in essential literacy learning exist. For example, decoding with automaticity, word recognition, fluency, and the like. And what additional scaffolding and support is required to accelerate reading comprehension. As a result, effective and attentive reading instruction coupled with embedded formative assessment will enable teachers to respond to student needs in real time and in the context of grade level standards. In closing, I would like to reiterate the brutal facts that are before us. We have a growing level of students who are on a trajectory of functional literacy at alarming rates. We continue to employ systemic processes and practices that include doing what we've always done to students who perform below grade level. State and local policies that sentence students to low-level instruction that serve to produce the self-fulfilling prophecy of low achievement. The NAEP reading assessment data clearly shows that these methods have failed our children, particularly Black and Brown children, for decades. However, we must not let this continue. We must lean into this literacy imperative and focus on using highly effective research-based approaches to literacy instruction, teaching foundational skills, developing content knowledge that accelerates vocabulary growth, and providing access to increasingly more rich, complex literary and informational text is of paramount importance. We must abandon the overuse of strategy-based instruction and leveled readers that simply fail in helping teachers provide the kind of literacy instruction that will enable students to read and comprehend text on grade level. In the words of William Frederick Halsey Jr., there are no great people in this world, only great challenges which ordinary people rise to meet. Let us answer the call. Let us rise together on behalf of our nation's children. Thank you.
Robin, thank you so much for that presentation. And right now, I want the audience to know that you can type questions in the chat space, and I will be more than happy to ask my friend Dr. Hall some questions. To get us started, Robin, I really loved your statement about removing level ceilings from reading instruction. And I'm wondering if you could share a little more about that in terms of how this translates into practice.
Thank you, Denise. And hello, everyone. The first thing that comes to mind is a quote from Alfred Tatum, and he says that leveled text leads to leveled lives. And as I referenced earlier in my presentation, I witnessed firsthand how students internalize low expectations of teachers into fewer opportunities to exceed. It translates into low self-esteem for themselves, where they won't take the risk of engaging in more challenging and rigorous tasks, and they sort of disengage for fear that they will fail. And without the encouragement, without the affirmation of teachers to say to students, you can do this. You know, we're going to work hard. We're going to persevere. I'll be right here next to you, and you will get this done. And I think that one way that we address that and make sure that, you know, we don't create these leveled ceilings for students is that we ensure that all students have the opportunity to engage in productive struggle with Tier 1 instruction, allowing them sufficient time to read and comprehend grade level text. And when students stumble over unfamiliar words or have difficulty understanding the text, not to retreat to less demanding or simplified text, such as level readers, but to give them, you ask questions, you give them sentence stems, you do take these sentences or juicy sentences, as Lily Warren Fillmore calls them, and you help them break the text down into chunks, and you dissect the phrases, and you talk about the meanings, and you bring it to life, and you establish these instructional routines that are a gateway into grade level text. And so teachers should take the time to discuss the text, provide scaffolded support on how to discern the meaning of words and context, and allow opportunities for students to express their thinking and ideas with their peers. And this daily re-engagement will reinforce them in terms of accessing the context of grade level assignments and grade level text.
So, Robin, just following up on that just a little bit, is there a place at all for leveled readers? And I think the other part of that is that I know that you really emphasize the use of read alouds, especially in K3, but from what I'm hearing you say, is that it's not just K3, it's also, it could be K8 that teachers should read to their children.
I read to my
And
students as high school students, and
yeah.
I don't know of an adult that does not get fully engaged in a read aloud of a rich poem or an engaging text. That storytelling is very powerful,
Yes.
and listening comprehension is very important in the reading process. So you may have a listening vocabulary or a listening comprehension that's higher than than actually reading the text. So that's very important. But yes, there is a place for leveled readers. I used to always say, take the leveled text and organize them by topic so that students can build a body of knowledge around particular topics. They will encounter some of the same words, and it builds their vocabulary, it builds their fluency, it builds their knowledge about the topic, which really helps build comprehension skills. So, and research says that the more knowledge students have about a topic, the greater their comprehension is of text around that topic. You can have readers who are strong. You can have two groups of readers. You can have a group of readers who are fairly weak that know a lot about a topic. And you can have readers that are strong readers that know very little about a topic. And you will find that the weaker readers will do better because they have more knowledge in a lot of instances. You see research that supports that. So, and what was the other piece I
No,
was
I think that was it though.
okay. Okay.
That whole idea of you want students to have rich texts, and we don't want our tier one instruction just to be relegated to level readers, which is something that I know was a caution that you often stated. But there are times that you can use what I'm hearing you say, you could use the level readers in addition to build background knowledge. Is that correct?
Right, and fluency to an extent.
Okay.
The other thing that's important to note, I think, in terms of the use of read alouds, is that when you're reading aloud to students, you want to read rich, complex text. You're not reading text that they would be able to read, let's say at the kindergarten, first grade level. It's not going to give the complexity of language, of text, the richness of the imagery. So you want to read texts that are 2 or 3 grade levels above, and really immerse the students in the language and the imagery and the vocabulary and the knowledge, and building those hooks in their minds for big ideas and concepts really helps to propel them and prepare them for reading grade level complex texts.
Thank you so much. And again, don't forget to post your questions in the chat space. Robin, you mentioned approaching unfinished learning in a constructive, asset-based manner to create equitable reading instruction to help students read on grade level. Could you talk a little more about that and maybe share how this actually looks in practice?
Sure. It's so important to validate children. And especially in a time like this during the pandemic, when many of them are just apprehensive about re-engaging. And I know some schools have already reopened and students have returned, but we talk about social emotional learning and, making sure that we build a community of learners, a risk-free environment where students, feel comfortable actually engaging and with the text and talking about text and reading text and communicating with their peers, because that's one of the things that really helps to motivate students, being able to engage with others and to share their opinions and to share their insights and what they are understanding through the text and some of the illustrations and how they feel, it relates to them. So it's very important first. And I know I'm going to get to the point of your question, but I think even before you talk about this bit, addressing unfinished learning in an asset-based manner, you have to make sure that the classroom environment is one that which students do feel a sense of community, and that they will, even if they feel somewhat hesitant to engage, there's a comfort level there. There's a encouraging atmosphere there, a nurturing atmosphere there that will help them re-engage in a way where they will be able to engage with grade level text, and teachers will be able to help address unfinished learning in an asset-based level, building on what they know, building on what they've learned during this pandemic, building on some of the things that they've learned to do that they probably thought they would not have ever learned had it not been for the pandemic. And so motivating students by showing them that they have what it takes to succeed, that, they do have the intellect, creativity, and the mind, and the support needed to achieve a high level. So the way it would look would be for the scaffolds that teachers employ to address unfinished learning, to be specifically targeted to the areas that students need to strengthen during the reading process, like the metacognitive strategies, the fluency, and you do this in order to expand, not limit their access to content. And you develop their higher order conceptual understanding and corresponding academic language. So students will thrive in classroom environments that allow multiple modes of communication, like the speaking, the listening, reading, and writing, using multiple representations such as pictures and diagrams and visual displays, and then providing students different ways to engage with the grade level text. They can work with their peers in small groups, or they can conduct interviews, and then make presentations or share written explanations, even a collage, to help reduce or eliminate barriers to show them what they really know and can do. So you give them multiple pathways to demonstrate what they know and to engage and expand on their perspectives as they are learning from their peers.
Okay. Thank you, Robin. The other thing that I noticed that you mentioned, you talked about using culturally relevant pedagogy in reading instruction. And are there any specific recommendations or strategies or things that you would share with the teacher to begin this process? Because I think you saw it as a moral imperative to actually focus on that in reading. So are there any specific strategies or recommendations that you would give?
Yes, and I think if people in this particular session were able to join the panel this morning, I think that San Antonio did a great job of framing the importance of having using culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally relevant texts and responsive teaching. And so a very important aspect of that, though, is the awareness of implicit bias that gets in the way of healthy student-teacher relationships. So we have to make sure that there are practices in place that ensure that teachers are empathetic and caring, reflective about their beliefs about people
from other cultures, and use texts that serve as mirrors and windows, as one of our panelists said, so they can
Mhm.
not only see themselves in the text, but also appreciate and learn about the culture of others. Additionally, making sure that, there are universals regardless of the expanse of cultures. We all care about family. We all have traditions. We all have
Mhm.
aspirations and dreams, and
Mhm.
we want to be united. And so pulling together those themes around different cultures and showing the commonalities, um, and their differences, but also knowing that we're all a part of a tapestry that constitutes the human race.
Mhm.
Um, so in terms of essential strategies, know your students. Learning about individual students is critical in how we design our curriculum and deliver it. So you want to make sure that students don't feel invisible. And
Mhm.
so also be aware of your personal biases. And then, you know, again, as I mentioned earlier, and then respect and reinforce student culture and the learn in the classroom, and involve family and community. There are ways where you can have students to bring in, you have things and have students to come in and share traditions. I've seen in schools where they would share authentic clothing and artifacts, and share the knowledge and what they represent, and all those things help to broaden perspective, and to and it instills an appreciation for each other
Yeah.
across the cultures.
And it's not just limited to a specific month or a specific day. And this is something
Right.
that's ongoing.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And we still have time for another question. Um, I'm wondering uh, if you could, at the K-3 level, I know that you've been involved in the Early Reading Accelerators program. And one of the things that you said during your presentation was about activating student interest to read text. And so I kept thinking, how does that actually look when you are focusing on foundational literacy, especially in K-3? So, how does that actually kind of give us a picture of how that actually looks?
Well, one of the things, there's several things, but especially in the early grades, when you are building phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, you're addressing concepts of print and the alphabetic principles. When you employ games and a lot of core reading, um, poetry, songs, that's a way that all of those uh, motivate students, and it excites students about reading aloud. Again, when you have your morning time on the rug with the students, and you're reading with them, and you're asking them questions about what they see in the pictures, and you're asking them questions about what the characters are doing, and you're helping to draw them into the text. You also give them a way of responding by acting out. So, for instance, if you're reading a text and the character is running, so you have the students get up and say, "And we're going to run like the character," and you have them to enact some of the things that are some of the action that is going on in the text, and all those things. When you engage them that way, it creates excitement and it creates joy. Another thing is to activate interest is to actually ask them, well, what would you like to learn more about? And then based on some of the interests, I mean, you can even gardening, for instance. A lot of people picked up a lot of new hobbies during the pandemic. Some people painted, some people cook more, so you generate tasks around texts that are teaching you how to do things. So let's make a pizza. So how do we make a pizza? And you're reading a story about pizza, and then you have informational text about ingredients, and so they find out that through reading, it's a window into so much more. That there's so many places you can go when you read a text. And so those kind of things help to really activate interest. And it also really fosters a joy of reading, and they just want more. And there's some stories that they like to hear over and over and over again. And so through role playing and core reading, it just really, building text sets around their interests where they get to learn more and more about particular topics, I think sets a really strong foundation for becoming good readers. I think you're muted.
I think one of the things that with that, when we heard the speaker talk about the fact that the reading scores for Black males and Hispanic males, how does that, what's your takeaway with that? How do we activate or cultivate a love of reading for our male students, our students of color that sometimes are hesitant to read and sometimes may not feel that these books are reflecting them, or they don't know how to engage with it? You have to have a spark. And that's what I'm hearing you say, talking about that spark to want to invite me into reading this quote unquote thick book.
Right.
Or wordy book.
And I think it goes back to that whole, the whole thing around culturally, that approach to making sure that you are providing culturally relevant materials, that you're using culturally responsive teaching practices, because, it's very possible for students to walk around the school during the entire day and feel invisible. And how do you bring them out of the shadows? First of all, you take the time to talk with them, to actually engage. So it goes back to knowing your students, and I think about the statement that students don't care what you know until they know you care about them. And so, validating them, taking the time to get to know them, having conversations with them. I would always do interest inventories with my students, and really and truly, a lot of the research shows that boys really have more of an interest in nonfiction than fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's how, what can I get out of this? So books that deal with identity, having a literary lineage that actually honors, and magnifies the voice of Black writers, of Black males, entering into a conversation about what's important to them. What are their struggles? What are their dreams? What are their successes? And build a sense of community around that, where they will re-engage, because it all boils down to re-engagement. Somewhere along the line, they felt and internalized low expectations to mean that I'm not going to, I don't have what it takes to be in an AP class. Nobody thinks I can achieve at high levels, so why even try? So I really do think it goes back to, making sure that you know your students, that you engage with your students, you know their interests, they know that you care. And then they'll take the risk because, when students disengage for years at a time, they start making decisions about themselves in elementary school based on what teachers are saying to them.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's not explicit. It's okay. You sit in that group. I'm not going to. I'm not going to ask you a question. I don't care. I don't care what you do as long as So
as long as you're quiet.
As long as you're quiet. So those are the kinds of things that I think are playing out in this data. I really do, and I think that's something that the educators really need to. As I said before, we have to lean into this imperative and re-engage our students. We need to take them by the hand. We need to let them know that we care. We need to let them know that they have the potential inside of them to achieve at high levels. And to, even beyond reading, they're doctors, they're inventors, they're scientists. We have to, as we talked about earlier, we have to remove that ceiling. Based on what some educators have said to some of these students, they've created a ceiling for themselves that they feel like they can't go through. Yeah. So we have to let them know that there is no ceiling. There are no limits. And I think if we can, if we rally around that, we can get our students back, and they can get their confidence back and motivation back. And then in turn, re-engage and show that they really can achieve at high levels.
Right. Thank you so much, Robin. And for everyone that has hung in here, Robin and I could continue talking a lot longer, but our time has ended. And so I do want to remind you of this next breakout session, as well as the closing session today. Please continue joining us today. We have an unbelievable closing panel and another set of wonderful breakout sessions. So please join with me in thanking Robin, Dr. Hall, for presenting to us today. And thanks again, Robin.
Thank you, Denise.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.